Hello and welcome back to Blurbal Reasoning Wheel of Time Edition. Today we are talking book 13 out of 14, Towers of Midnight by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. If you're new here, hi, I listen to these through Audible and it's taken me 4 years and change to get to this point. I also have ADHD. Kind of contributing to why, but you know, I keep talking about that, like, oh my god, it's taking me so long to get through Wheel of Time, and like worrying about it, like, oh, how many other epic fantasy series that I want to go check out are going to take me, you know, half a decade, and etc., dooming about that, right? But I was thinking back to when I read A Song of Ice and Fire back in uni, and obviously there's only 5 books in that series so far, and back when I was at uni a decade ago, that was also the case, and those books are of a similar length, right? I mean, off the top of my head, I think they're about 1,000 pages each, if not more. And it took me like 2 years to read through those 5 books. So if anything, my reading speed has actually increased, judging by those averages. But of course, it's not about how fast we get through the books. It's about how much we enjoy them. And I'm starting to see my long meandering journey through the Wheel of Time as a boon, because it means I've spent longer with these characters in this world. I've had more time between chapters to think. But anyway, we're not here to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire or how long it takes to read books. We're here to talk about Towers of Midnight. And boy, do I have some things to say, because this book kind of went places. I will say right off the bat, before we get into specifics, the pacing is interesting, because you think about the pacing of A Wheel of Time in general, and it's been glacial at points, right? And I'm not going to say it's bad for being fast or anything, but the pacing is a fair bit faster here. It feels like something major is happening almost every chapter, and you get the impression that they could have spread this out over more books if they had wanted to, and it would have still been a really good read. But I think it's just a consequence of all of these plot lines starting to like wrap up and converge and that kind of thing. And so while it's the same amount of pages and a similar amount of words to previous Wheel of Time books, it feels like so much more has happened in this book than previous ones, although that has been happening for like 2 books before this as well. Turns out when you manage to finish an epic fantasy series, it pays off. Or at least that's how I feel with the penultimate book so far. Reading this book was like, you know that Vince McMahon gif? Is that his name? The wrestling guy in the chair who's like looking around and like, oh, and then like fanning his face as more things happen, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's the meme for this book. So firstly, something I really appreciated about this book is some of the interspersed chapters, or I guess little sections of chapters, focus on 2 characters that kind of keep our attention on the Borderlands and like, you know, the fact that the last battle is clearly beginning in this book. Mainly, of course, I'm talking about Eitaralda. Rydol Eitaralda, the man... Well, I was going to say the man whose name I can't spell but can say because I listened to the audio version of these books, but that's true of hundreds of characters. He had some really, really fun chapters. I mean, they weren't fun for him, but they were fun for me reading it. It was just laser focused on what's happening at the border, you know, with the Trollocs invading. And it's fun because I feel like I might be wrong on this, but I feel like we've had entire books where Trollocs are barely mentioned, where the fight of the Shadow against, you know, the Light is only shown to us through, oh, this Forsaken is doing a shady dealing, you know. Sometimes the threat to the world has felt a little too... how shall I put this? A little too intangible, a little too like a force of nature rather than like actual villainous minds with armies attacking. And the conflicts of this series, a lot of them are focused on, you know, just people versus people a lot of the time. And that's great, because this isn't Lord of the Rings. You know, this is like the Lord of the Rings part of the universe, which is happening now, it feels like. But at the same time, yeah, it's been a little bit too long, it feels like. And it's been slowly ramping up over the last few books, but it's nice to just have some, like, solid armies clashing. And I think, you know, I don't know what parts were written by Robert Jordan and what parts were written by Brandon Sanderson. This book felt a lot more Brando Sando to me than the previous one, but again, that's just guesswork. But one thing I know Brandon Sanderson does really well is fantasy action scenes, and there was a lot of that in Eitaralda's chapters, and it was just good stuff. I hope there's more of that to come in the final book. In fact, we're not strictly talking about these characters right now, but while we're talking about Brandon Sanderson doing action really well, the whole thing with Elaine and the different pendants, the different Foxhead medallions, and how that entire fight scene shaped out, that has Brandon Sanderson all over it. Like, I would be shocked if he did not create pretty much the entirety of that fight scene. Just the way that man plays around with magic systems and quick thinking in combat regarding magic systems, and how he applied that to, like, you know, the flawed Foxhead medallions that Elaine had tried to create versus the real one she had, and the flawed ones barred people from channeling, so she was able to throw them at someone to prevent them from channeling at her, which wasn't necessarily the desired effect, but it got us where we needed to be. And yeah, it was just so fucking cool. And I don't have a lot to say about Elaine's perspective in this book, so I'll just let that slide in here out of sequence. But yeah, sorry, I was talking about multiple perspectives regarding the Borderlands. The other one I wanted to talk about was Lan, who is trying to march to his death for his pride to retake not Manethrin, Malkir. That's the one. I know these places. I've spent a decent amount of time in this world by now. And he doesn't want anyone to know he's going because he knows he's going to fight an unwinnable battle. But of course, over the course of a book, people do discover him, people do flock to him, and I think it's mentioned that he has an army around like a few thousand strong or something, or was it like 10,000 or something? Yeah, because it was like 10,000 of them versus like 100,000 Trollocs. And I get Lan's character, and I get the whole sense of honor and stuff why he's doing this, but as he's throwing himself against 100,000 Trollocs at the end of this book, all I can think of is, man, that would have been nice to have with the rest of the armies getting ready for the last battle. Come on, dude, that wasn't very tactfully done, was it? Although I'm sure the next book is going to be full of him and his army of badass Malkiri, or Malkiri, or whatever, you know, cutting a swathe into the Blight and doing better than they should. But yeah, I really liked those two perspectives. Thank you, Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. Those were great. Okay, let's talk Rand, because at the end of the last book, Rand almost decided to blow up the world because he was having a bit of a bad day, and something happened, something I might have missed happened with the creator. Did the creator lift Rand's madness? Was that like divine intervention? I did go back and try and listen to it again, but I couldn't find a specific point that I think I might have missed. Either way, Rand is more himself now, and he's kind of merged with his previous identity of Luzferin. There's a really fun chapter where he's with Min and he's talking to Cadswain. I feel like I always forget her name in these videos, but I didn't even have to look her up. I just had to pause for a second. And he's like, you know I'm older than you, right? And everyone's looking at him and he's like, yeah, I'm Luzferin as well. Catch up. No, but seriously though, it's been so refreshing, the Rand stuff in this book. I really liked his descent, don't get me wrong. It's not like he was one of the more laborious chapters. He's always been a fascinating read. But it's been really refreshing and pleasing to see this man smile again, and to see, you know, he's not perfect, and he has a lot of regrets about what he's done, and he still loses his temper when he goes to help out Ita Rolda towards, I want to say, the middle of this book, and does a whole bunch of Trolloc killing. But I really like this new balanced Rand of just like, you know, he's himself again. It's so nice. It makes for such an interesting protagonist of like, he feels like he's matured as well. Like, he's not just Farm Boy Rand from book 1 again. But I think maybe a bit more of the Rand who was kind of ruling in Tyr around book 3, because like, I mean, even then he was still trying to make himself be a hard man, etc. But he was like doing stuff like making sure people got grain, making sure people who were enemies were helping each other now. Kind of feels like we got that Rand back. While I'm thinking about it, because I didn't make a specific note about it, we should talk about Nynaeve learning how to cure madness. That's a pretty big deal. And we learned that madness is like a physical manifestation of darkness, like stabbing into their brains, which is kind of fucking metal. And whatever divine intervention saved Rand kind of like manifests as like this golden aura, like lifting the madness. Like, it's still there, but it's not affecting him anymore. It's not actually touching him. And yeah, Rand has spent a lot of this book just kind of going around and fixing things, fixing his mistakes in like Ebu Dar and stuff like that. Speaking of characters who are a lot more balanced than they used to be, Perrin found his balance in this book as well. Perrin, Mr. Slow on the Uptake himself, finally learned not only how to balance his human self with his inner wolf, and learned that actually him losing control isn't because of a wolf. That's just, you know, his own thing that he needs to deal with. But more importantly, he learned to confide in his wife about these things, about the fact that he can... I mean, I think she already knew some of it, right? Fael already knew some of Perrin's stuff with wolves, but she didn't know the extent of it, and like, she didn't know about Hopper and the wolf dream and all this stuff, and it was so nice to have them actually talking and working as a team. Oh my god, there have been so many books of them just yelling at each other. I hated it. Why did we need so much of them yelling at each other? Apparently Fael likes it when they argue. I gotta question that girl's upbringing. To be fair, The Wheel of Time has a lot of relationships in it, and to Robert Jordan's credit, there's a lot of different relationship styles shown in it as well. It's very extensive with that kind of thing, and I suppose one of the things he wanted to explore was a relationship where, you know, it's not always getting along well all the time. Like, there's a lot of arguing, but at the same time, there's a lot of love at the heart of it. I don't know. I haven't been in a relationship like that, but they're around. Anyway, we had one of our first character deaths in the book was Hopper, which was fucking sad. I was so sad. I'm kind of a multitasker, okay? I listen to these books while I do other things. I will neither confirm nor deny whether I listen to these books while I'm at work, but keeping on top of emotions when Hopper's dying and you gotta carry on, like, you just... Okay, that was a time. Young Bull. No, Hopper, don't leave us. We still haven't dealt with Slayer, and I have a weird theory as to who Slayer is, but the book does keep occasionally turning around and making me feel like an idiot for having this theory. But I don't know, because I feel like there's also a lot of evidence that points towards frickin'... Oh no, what's his name? Oh, the other wolf man, the forest man, the guy that Perrin found in the forest who taught him how to be a wolf man. The other guy with golden eyes. I do not remember his name. Oh, good lord. I am a terrible person. Either way, him. Now, it kind of doesn't make sense, but I don't know. I've got a funny feeling. For one thing, he... At one point, Perrin offhandedly asked him, like, hey... how have you reached your balance with the whole wolf thing? And he's like, oh, I don't know, it just kind of happened, lol. Smile. Shrug. That's not an explanation, my guy. What are you hiding? But also, when Perrin has a suspicion that Slayer's Luke, but then Slayer says Luke hates you, you know. So, it's not Luke. But Slayer also looks a lot like Lan, apparently. And there is another character in the books who's described as looking a lot like Lan, so it's probably that person, but I do not remember who that was, and that is bugging me. But my brain just goes to, well, you can change your look in the Wolf Dream. But also, like, maybe what Perrin's picking up on is the whole warder thing, because Lan is the first warder that Perrin met, and probably the one he thinks of when he thinks of warders. And Woodsman McGee, oh my god, I'm so annoyed I cannot remember his name. He is also a warder. It's brought up very briefly. When it was brought up, I was like, oh shit, I completely forgot this information. But apparently, he is a warder to an Aes Sedai, and the Aes Sedai basically drove him out when they realized he could talk to wolves, etc. So I'm thinking Woodsman McGee has found his balance by killing wolves in the Wolf Dream. He tells Perrin that the Wolf Dream is a very dangerous place when he brings it up, and he should not go there. And I don't know, maybe there's some split personality thing going on with him. You know, it's a bit of a stretch when you have to say maybe there's a split personality thing going on with him to make it fit, but, you know, because he is very kind to Perrin in the real world. But I don't know, if I'm right about this, I'm gonna come back here and comment I was right and pin it and heart my own comment and thumbs up my own comment, and you're gonna have to be like, yeah, you were right, dude, that theory, that makes kind of no sense, you got it. Like, he also says to Perrin at one point towards the end of the book, like, I'm gonna have to go now, and Perrin's like, okay, see you later. Like, he doesn't really question it, but I'm like, why, where, who, what? Oh my god, that reminds me of something else. Actually, one of the biggest criticisms I have with this book is what that reminds me of. At no point is it indicated to us that what is happening with Perrin in the first half of this book is occurring on a different timescale than the rest of the book. It isn't until we get to Perrin seeing Rand in the wolf dream at the top of the mountain at the end of the last book that I go, oh shit, oh, all of Perrin's chapters have been... They should have been in the previous book, up until that point anyway. But like... I don't know why they did that. I assume it's because something didn't add up on the timeline and, you know, they had to make it make sense somehow. But here's the thing. Tam kept showing up in Perrin's camp. He also was in the previous book with Rand. I was very confused by this because nobody was bringing it up. And so I ended up cooking up this theory that maybe one of these Tams is fake. Maybe one of them is a dark friend in disguise and it's a plot to kill Rand. And so this entire time I was side-eyeing Tam in Perrin's chapters because he felt very genuine in Rand's chapters. I've been side-eyeing him in Perrin's chapters like, when is this dark friend going to reveal himself? So to then learn that, oh no, it was just before he went to Rand in the previous book, I was like, oh, okay, that was a lot of wasted energy, thanks. Like, I get maybe the timelines shifted and we needed Perrin to catch up in terms of timelines, but I wouldn't have missed a little note, a little author's note at the start of this book that's like, hey, just so you know. You know? Or at least some better indication. Like, it kind of reminds me of A Feast for Crows and how half of the characters aren't in that book. I know I said we weren't talking about A Song of Ice and Fire, but here we go again. But George R.R. Martin at least put a note at the end of that book saying why. And so it wasn't like I was cooking up theories as to why half the characters suddenly didn't exist. I don't know, that bugged me. Anyway, oh god, this video is far longer than the previous videos. Just so you know, we're on bullet point 3 of 11 right now. Anyway, another thing that Perrin was dealing with was the White Cloak murder allegations. And I thought that was really well done, because, you know, Perrin's like, fucking White Cloaks, like... I mean, he never drops an F-bomb, but he's like, they're always hounding me about these people who killed Hopper back originally in like book 1 or 2 or something. He never actually stops to kind of take responsibility for the fact that he did fly into a rage and kill these White Cloaks, who didn't understand that the wolves are kind of sentient beings. They shouldn't have killed the wolves, and they definitely weren't good men. But at the same time, there is some measure of responsibility that Perrin should take. And I thought what was really cool about his chapters is that as he starts to understand that him losing control isn't him losing control to the wolf, it's him losing control of himself, he also starts to realize that, oh, maybe he does have some kind of responsibility for what he did. Just because the White Cloaks were shits doesn't mean... You know, and it's been a long time since I read those chapters, so if I'm misremembering this, might be, but just because those White Cloaks were horrible people doesn't mean that it was okay to kill them in anger. And it was cool that they got more gays. You know, she was revealed to be more gays, and that's a whole thing. I mean, I knew it, I paid attention, don't worry, but like, it was a whole thing for the characters in the book, and they actually went through, and they were like, okay, what happened? And Perrin's like, yo, not a dark friend. Can speak to wolves. They're my friends. White Cloaks killed my friends. And everyone's like, okay. He just came right out and said it. And Morghese did something I absolutely love. She said, whether or not him being able to talk to wolves makes him a dark friend isn't the point of his case. The point of his case is whether he was justified in killing the White Cloaks because the White Cloaks killed his friends, when the White Cloaks didn't know the wolves were his friends. And they come up with like this whole thing of like, oh, it wasn't murder, but it was still an unlawful killing. And then you get this really unlikely friendship develop between Perrin and Galad, and there's definitely no gay vibes there. I'm sorry, I'm bi, I look for it everywhere. Friends can just be friends, I know, but come on, it's a little bit. Maybe Fael's down to throuple, I don't know. Although if Galad and Perrin got together, Berlin would probably just die of frustration on the spot. Anyway, that's Camp Perrin. He's a well-grounded, likable individual now. It took 12 books, 13 books, sorry, but we got there. No, I joke. I've liked Perrin in the past. I find that whether I like a character or not is very much down to how slow their character development is progressing. I've hated Nynaeve in the past, and I've really enjoyed her in the past. I've hated Egwene in the past, and I've really enjoyed her in the past. I've hated Matt's guts in the past, and I've really enjoyed him in this book. We'll get to him later, though. Egwene's main thing in this book is that she's the Amelin seat now, but we're not going to spend too long talking about her securing her power as a rightful and lawful Amelin seat, because it would be retreading a lot of old ground with her, you know, grabbing authority and earning respect with the Hall of the Tower, or whatever they were called, the Rebel Aes Sedai. We did dedicate like a chapter to her finding out they were having a hall sitting without her, but for the most part, it's like we can just imagine most of that stuff is happening off screen. It's very much alluded to happening a lot. But the main two things about Egwene in this book is firstly, her and Gawain. Gawain, poor boy, took a big hit to his pride when suddenly the girl he liked was the Amelin, and he didn't realize that maybe she didn't need a knight in shining armor to rescue her, except she kind of did, except she kind of didn't. It was very nuanced and not something I can quickly summarize in this video, but it was pretty good, I thought. She needed him more than she thought, while at the same time he thought she needed him more than she did. You know, it's interesting. That being said, I didn't love the whole Egwene and Gawain part of this book. It was definitely one of the slower parts of this book, of like a we get it part, you know, like that still goes on. I think that's everywhere in epic fantasy. It's an interesting thing to think about, like, would the payoffs in epic fantasy be as good as they are without the many chapters of slower, more character-focused stuff, you know? Anyway, they've done something with Egwene that I don't particularly like. They've put her in opposition to Rand, who says he's going to break the seals on the Dark One's prison. I know why they've done this. They've done this because Rand might be in his right mind now, but he needs to convince the world that he's in his right mind, and walking around and saying, so I need to break the seals on the Dark One's prison, isn't gonna help. It's realistic that people would not trust Rand saying, I need to break the seals on the Dark One's prison. That sounds like a pretty not okay thing to do. I'm annoyed that they made Egwene the character for it, because Egwene, up until now, has been very intelligent. She's been pretty good at reading people, I think. And she's the character who has this history with Rand of, like, childhood friends who were probably going to be married if their lives didn't take drastic turns. But they've chosen her to be the character to stubbornly just be like, oh, we've got to stop him from doing this. And she's rallying armies of thousands and thousands of people to meet him on the fields of Merilor, I think it is, to stop him from breaking the seals. And I just don't know that Egwene would be that stubborn. That stubbornly suspicious of Rand. I guess they're trying to do a thing where Egwene is an Aes Sedai. That part of her identity takes precedent over Egwene as the younger girl who knew Rand and trusted him, etc. But it's just, it feels like the trope of misunderstanding. Like the plot of misunderstanding to, you know, cause events to happen in stories that I hate the most. It feels like we're doing that. I hope it doesn't last too long into the final book. I don't want there to be some goddamn civil war because people don't trust Rand. It's an interesting problem because it makes a lot of sense that people wouldn't trust him, but still, I don't know. It's an interesting one. More people need to be like Perrin, who's like, he's gonna break the seals on the Dark One's prison? Well, if Rand says it needs to be done, I guess it needs to be done. I'm gonna join Rand. Which, actually, now that I think about it, is kind of wild, because Perrin doesn't know he's not mad anymore yet. We've spent too long on this point. Should we talk about when the book starts to get absolutely bonkers? Avienda. Last time we checked in with Avienda, she spent like many books realizing that she was supposed to be accepting the mantle of Wise One. You know that thing I just talked about where I said, you know, whether I like characters depends on how slow their character development is going? I've really not liked Avienda for a while. Avienda is my favourite character in this book. I'm easy to please. No, I'm not. Go read Avienda's chapters. She learned some really interesting things. Avienda goes to Ruidion. Ruidion? I mean, we've got two narrators and they say it differently. Ruidin? I think I've heard one of them say Ruidin before. I'm saying Ruidion. And first of all, I think Avienda has some really like cool thoughts about what does it mean to be an Aiel when the whole point of being an Aiel was like leading up to the moment of, you know, the Karakan being in the world and serving him and meeting their toe with like the Aes Sedai for their sins of the past, etc. And Avienda has a lot of very valid thoughts about like, well, why should we return to the Freefold land? We've met our toe. It's foolish to continue meeting toe that's been met. You know, like, why should we, like, do we just go back to fighting between ourselves? We were only doing that to, like, grow stronger and harder as a people so that we could be the dragon's people. That's where we are now. Why would we keep doing that? And so she's met with this kind of identity crisis for the Aiel of, like, who are they going to be after the last battle? Like, that stuff was interesting enough by itself. I liked that stuff. And then she uses her Angreal detecting powers to, like, try and figure out what's going on with the gateways in Rodion shit, in Steroid Town, because she needs, you know, something more than just the stuff that all the Wise Ones see, because Rand kind of, like, told everyone what all the Wise Ones see. And it's like, well, I already know this stuff, so my spirit journey, for want of a better term, there is a better term, my pilgrimage to Rodion, Rumpelstiltskin, has been for nothing. And so she fiddles with the weird pre-breaking era tech magic mumbo jumbo and accidentally gets some visions of the future. Now, the chapters in which Rand learned about the past, the Aiel past, and we got to see, like, his children after being Luz Therin and, like, them dealing with the breaking of the world and the Aes Sedai, the male Aes Sedai going mad and all that stuff, all those lore chapters and all the chapters that came after are some of my favourite chapters in all of A Wheel of Time. So when Aviendha started messing with this, I was so excited, and my god, I was not prepared for where that went. I think I sussed out that she was looking into the future instead of the past by about the second vision. Although I already had my doubts with the first when it was mentioned that these people who looked like the Seanchan had these things called histics. And I was thinking, that doesn't sound like anything we know of history so far with the Aiel. And I was like, is it possible this is even further back in time, like a cycle before Luz Therin's era, etc.? And I guess as far as we know with the lore of this world, that's technically true. The future becomes the past, and the past becomes the future. Time turns, and the wheel of time turns, and the time of the turning happens. Ages come and pass, and legends that fade to myth become happen again. Give me a break, I've only heard it 13 times. But yeah, when it was cemented, the knowledge that we were looking into the future, I was absolutely drop dead fascinated. Because something I've been thinking about as we near the end of A Wheel of Time is, man, it's a shame that we don't get to see what happens in the future, or what happens in a different age in this book a little bit more. Like, I've heard that it's Robert Jordan's wishes that they don't, like, get someone else to write, like, spin-off series in his world, and I respect that. That's totally fine. But he writes that lore so well, I'm just like, god damn, I would love just series, you know, Robin Hobbit, be like, okay, you've seen this part of the world, now let's see this part of the world, except instead of parts of the world, do different eras. But like I said, Robert Jordan didn't want it, so don't do it. Either way though, we actually got to see the future of, like, what happens specifically to the Aiel people and Aviendha's line after the last battle happens. And so we got to see, like, this really fun, like, I don't know, I'm thinking, like, Naruto Next Generation shit of, like, the different children Rand has by Elaine and Aviendha, and I'm guessing Min, and what the world is like afterwards, and how they're, like, treated as the lineage of the dragon, and they're treated as, like, these people whose words are to be taken, like, as good advice, I guess. I find it very interesting that Aviendha's daughter is so goddamn potent in the one power that she can just hold to it constantly. She doesn't know what it's like to not be holding the one power. That feels like a really interesting protagonist template for a character, but I guess that's probably all we're gonna get of that. I don't know why, but that also feels very Brandon Sanderson. But we got to see how, like, you know, in the last vision, which is Aviendha's direct daughter, like, it's still the Aiel and the Wetlanders and the Seanchan, but the next vision, or I guess the previous vision, which is her daughter's daughter, it's just for Aiel and the Seanchan, which I mentioned, which makes you think those are the only people who are left. And it's interesting because they talk about how when the Wetlanders joined the war, that you know, with whatever treaties Rand had drawn up regarding peace, that gave the Seanchan all the excuse they needed to just wipe out the Wetlanders. That's the impression I got. Maybe I'm wrong, but, like, we heard about how the White Tower had fallen in that vision, if I remember right. Oh my god, those chapters, they must have spawned so many YouTube videos. But I'm guessing what's going to happen with that future is it is going to be averted somehow, because if not, that's pretty fucking bleak. But it is fascinating, the idea of like, yeah, the last battle is gonna happen and it's really important, and the Shon-Chen are the true threat afterwards. And like how they treat people, obviously, and like they drive Aiel back into the Threefold Land, and by the time of the first vision, which is the furthest from Avienda's lineage, Aiel are just treated as like these barbarians in the wastes whose lives are meaningless, while the Shon-Chen are known as like, I mean, they're known to the Aiel, who are very unintelligent by this point, as like the light makers. And part of me just thinks like, what the fuck are they doing out there? What are they doing? Are they creating some kind of powerful, like, Angreal? Are they going to space? It could be anything. I think when I'm done with the Wheel of Time, I'm going to be looking into, like, videos on YouTube to see what people think about these chapters, because it's so goddamn interesting. But also, my theory is what's happening with this is, if Rand just goes to the last battle and wins and seals the Dark One away again or something, and time turns as it's supposed to, if a Wheel of Time continues as it always has, I feel like these are the events which would take place. But I feel like the ending of this series is going to be breaking out of the Wheel of Time and allowing, you know, breaking free of fate in that way, and like not having to repeat these eras all the time. But that's a theory based on very little. It's just, I had a lot of thoughts towards the beginning of this series. I think if you go back and listen to some of my first Blurbal reasonings on these books, I was talking about like, wait, when we talk about the threat to the end of a world, are we talking in terms of the end of the age and like the end of a world as it would happen in the Wheel of Time? Or are we talking about breaking the Wheel of Time altogether? And I think there was a line recently in one of these books, something along the lines of like, the Dark One only has to win once. Like, the Rand or like the Dragon Reborn or the Forces of Light or whatever through the ages always have to rebuff the darkness, but the darkness only needs to win once. At least I think there was a line regarding that. And I think about balefire and burning people out of a pattern and what that means for the cycle of rebirth, and how events can return and continue as they did before if people are no longer there because of balefire and that kind of thing. Anyway, yeah, the Avienda chapters, they really, really, really just fascinated me. I absolutely loved them. I might go back and listen to them again soon. That's the problem with listening to these series on audio. Going back and like rereading passages is a little more unwieldy when it's like audio commentary. It's a little harder to skim back and forth and go, wait, what was happening here? At least that's how I feel. Anyway, the other really fun thing that happened towards the end of this book was Matt's D&D adventure with Tom and Noel, who was obviously Jane Farstrider all along. That was made pretty obvious at the very start. That is one thing I'm happy to say I did pick up on. I hope I brought that up in a previous Blurbal reasoning. I'm sure I did. But like when Rand's talking to him and he's like, Jane Farstrider, he was bad. He left his wife for adventure, and she was destitute without him. He was a terrible man. I know this because I was his cousin, but yes, I feel very strongly about it. I've seen a few things in my time, you know, or at least Jane Farstrider's told me about them. And I'm like, yeah, okay, Noel, sure. Pat's head, whatever, Jane. It's yet another notch on, oh my god, Matt, that's his name. Sorry, this book has too many characters. It's another notch on Matt's belt of like, this character doesn't realize he's a living legend. Like, that's the sense I get with Matt, right? Matt from Coffin. Like, he's constantly just like thinking, I'm just a farm boy. Why is all this stuff happening to me? This kind of thing wouldn't happen to me. That's insane. And like the fact that he just happens to have met and been traveling with Jane Farstrider this entire time is like at the end of this book, he's pretty shook by that. I'm like, yep, it's still happening to you, Prince of the Ravens. Like, the universe is conspiring to make Matt a really important and fucking cool, badass character against his will. Like, I think of how characters, just their physical appearances have evolved over time, and Matt has become this one-eyed, spear-wielding Prince of the Ravens, and, like, he hears rumors about himself sometimes. He's like, that doesn't sound like me. And I'm like, dude, that is you. Forgive me if I'm plagiarizing this from, like, some half-remembered scene, but I would love, if I could draw, I would love to draw fan art of, like, a viewing that Min might have had regarding, like, a raven plucking out Matt's eye, because when you think about it, that's Pretty good symbolism, right? Huh? Hey, what's up? It's me. I'm a writer. Nah, but the whole thing with the Aelfin and Eelfin and going back in to save Moraine, that thing just felt straight up like a D&D adventure. You've even got Tom the Bard, for Christ's sake. Matt the Gambler? Is Gambler a class in D&D? It's a class in some games. I don't know. I don't know what Noel would be in terms of character class, but it's fine. We don't have to turn it completely into a D&D adventure. Now, remember when I said I didn't miss the fact that Noel was obviously Jane Fastrider? I'll tell you one thing I did miss. The romance between Tom and Moraine. Like, it was obvious based on how Tom was talking about Moraine for the last few books, don't get me wrong. But when the two of them were together, like, I remember Moraine at one point saying, like, oh, I'm not completely inhuman. There is someone I would marry if I had the chance. And I always found that line very curious, and also pointing to the fact that she clearly wouldn't stay dead. But Tom, like, if I went back and reread the early books, would I be looking at myself now and being like, you're an idiot, it was obviously there? Or is this very much like a lot of those chapters were told from the perspective of naive young characters, and therefore you wouldn't have noticed. By the way, talking about Matt and his missing eye now, which I think is so fucking badass, because it's kind of like insinuated that Matt had divined what was meant by the fact that he would have to give up half the light of the world, just by the fact that he willingly walked into it and didn't seem surprised when it happened. Obviously he was in tremendous pain, but you know, there was no line like, I didn't expect that, or, you know, anything like that. Then again, I could say the same about the Jane Fastrider reveal until a later chapter when Matt was like, I didn't realise that was Jane Fastrider. I was like, oh, it would have been cool if you'd known all along and just been chill about it. But in a previous video, I said the whole prophecy about him having to give up half the light of the world to save it, I thought that was either something to do with sacrificing Olva or sacrificing Tuon, and I was becoming more and more convinced that it would be sacrificing Tuon, because Tuon is very much a villainous character at this point. But no, it was his eye. I think symbolically it could also be Olva, because he refused to open the letter, and now Olva's run off to fight Trollocs and Caemlyn, and that probably isn't going to turn out well for Olva. But that's a bit more of a stretch. We'll talk more about that later, by the way. But yeah, I just loved the little D&D adventure they went on when they went and saved Moraine, who was just floating in a room like some treasure that they were hoarding. And of course we later learned that they were like siphoning the one power from her and basically treating her as like a drug, which is kind of fucked up. I also loved the kind of detail, by the way, that the reason they wanted Matt's eye was because it was, you know, the eye of a Taviran, and I'm guessing like the way that power works and emotion works and all that stuff is the fact that like he's seen so much through that eye, that it's like an object of power to them. And yeah, when Noel died though, when Jane Fastrider met his end, I was again misty-eyed in a place of like, why is this man crying to himself? I wasn't expecting to be so affected by Noel's death. Turns out I really liked the guy. But just tell them Jane Fastrider died well. Yes, Jane, I will, thank you. God, just the instant acceptance that he is who he says he is, because of course he is, because he's dying like a goddamn hero. Who else could he be? And then, of course, in the epilogue chapter, we learn about Varen's letter, because Olva opens it. And for all the times that being a Taviran has twisted chance and worked fate in Matt's favour, boy did it not this time. The whole reveal of, just so you know, there's a waygate, which everyone thinks is safe in Caemlyn. It's not, was huge, because it's like, when was the last time we thought about waygates in this world? Like, of course they've been used to ferry Trollocs around before, and clearly they were done so to foreshadow an event like this happening, but just the fact that, like, you know, and there was this imminent invasion that was threatened to Elaine as well by one of the Dark Friends as well. This reveal was just so well done and so good. And the fact that it came too late, and they looked and they were like, oh shit, Caemlyn's on fire, the Trollocs are already here. It's such a good way to be like, oh hey, the last battle is beginning, by the way. I did forget to talk about Elaine basically seceding the two rivers to Perrin by way of Rand. I've just realised, but there we go, now I've talked about that. The Two Rivers is a province of Andor now, instead of just a sleepy little town that nobody cares about. However, I did take note that in one of Avienda's future visions, someone talked about the Two Rivers like it was its own kingdom, so that's fun to think about. Anyway, one of the other things that happened in the epilogue chapter was evil, twisted Aiel, who I'm guessing are the opposite of Aiel in that they lift their veils to kill. Is that what we're doing? That's the kind of dumb shit that's so cool. I love it. But yeah, it makes me think of like, oh, like if the Aiel are the people of a dragon, are these twisted, evil Aiel-looking creatures? Are they like the people of the shadow or something? Are they like this secret common infantry unit that's been held back until the last battle started? Or are they the Shido and they've been twisted by corruption by the Dark One himself or some shit? I don't know. They did remind me of the Inquisitors. Were they called Inquisitors? It's been so long since I read Mistborn. But like the people with like the steel spikes through their eyes and stuff, like something about them reminded me of them. I'd be curious to learn whether they were a Robert Jordan design or a Brandon Sanderson design. And of course we get that dream with Rand, and that dream with the woman who is basically the soul of Lanfear, because it was mentioned that the Eelfin or the Aelfin or whoever accidentally killed Lanfear by using too much of her power and draining her. So she is dead, she has been reborn, she is being tormented, and Rand is still seduced by her. I get that they needed to show us that Rand still had feelings for Lanfear, or Luciferin still had feelings for the woman that Lanfear used to be, but it was a little bit weird for all that horrible shit to happen and her get yanked away, and for him to learn all of this stuff about her, and for Rand to be like, damn, I do kind of want her though. Not now, Rand. Now's not the time for that, as Professor Oak once said. Anyway, mercifully, I think that brings us to the end of my thoughts on Towers of Midnight. Bloody stunning book, loved every second. Well, not every second, a couple of seconds were a little slow. But I can't believe that I am now approaching the very end of a series. I have a lot of feelings, but I will get to them when I am done. I will see you back here sometime before I hit 30, which will be next summer, because that was my that was my initial goal for finishing the Wheel of Time, but I somehow think we're going to meet that deadline. Catch you then.